when I saw them all in shirt sleeves and I'm in this big coat, it reminded me when we were doing a Catch the Fire conference in the Fernham Hall. I don't know if any of you came to that at the height of Toronto. And it was just three congregations, Baptist and ourselves and somebody else, and we used to put these things on. And whenever we had a chance for people to come down the front to be prayed for, to catch the fire and the anointing, the fire alarms would go off. Not just once, but every single time. And it was always a fire alarm that was right over where we were praying for people. And there was never a fire. And I thought, isn't it the goodness of God? And I think also the sense of humour of God as well, to do something like that. It was quite amazing. That was also the time when we used to see gold and oil appearing on people all the time as well, which again was another wonderful sign from God that He's with us. And everybody was trying to work out, what does that mean prophetically? And it means God's with us. Yeah. And gold is just the dust of the streets of heaven. You know, perhaps there's angels moving around and shedding a bit of dust off the shoes or whatever, who knows. But it was a sign God's with us. I just wanted to focus a little bit, because as we go through this month of December, really our focus is on birth, isn't it? New birth, new creation birth, Jesus, the Messiah, being born to bring new creation for us so we can be really born again. And there's an amazing intervention of God in such a situation that was so absolutely disastrous. I mean, Israel had been apostate for hundreds and hundreds of years and not walking with God. The temple was vacated from the presence of God. It was in a right old mess. The world was in a right old mess. And God intervened in such a small but powerful way. And I've said this before, that God's answer to all the chaos that was taking place in the cosmos was to plant some of His DNA in the womb of a virgin. You know, something incredibly small brought about something so fantastic that changed the whole course of creation by bringing reconciliation and healing and forgiveness and the defeat of the devil through that. And it made me think that even during this time, as we think in that way, a lot of us have been going through harmful times and difficult times and traumatic times, you know, with all sorts of stuff happening in the fellowship that has been quite traumatic. I think particularly with Joan and Trish and Ali with her family, and we've had bereavement and death of some of the key people in the fellowship, and there's been the coronavirus, and there's been people who've left and not come back, which virtually every congregation I know is experiencing the same thing for various reasons. And we've had all that sort of stuff going on, and yet God is still God. And within the framework of all that stuff going on, we've seen amazing acts of kindness and goodness, haven't we? We've seen generosity springing up in the streets and people doing amazing things. We've seen amazing stuff from the healthcare community, and even the new vaccines that they had to develop to fight coronavirus has opened the door up for many more new vaccines because of those new medical procedures. And we've seen in amongst all the hurt and all the pain and all the suffering that God is doing amazing things as well. We've seen acts of war in Europe that we never expected, you know, and that evil that's propagated out of Putin's little cohort of supporters, and yet behind that we've seen amazing acts of support and strength in NATO and in Europe and other nations working together. And I thought about how sometimes we can be on these wonderful highs of seeing the amazing thing God's doing, like I was saying with that lady who was abused, that testimony there, from the horror of abuse, and I know how much that can impact people for many, many, many years in their life. But in and amongst all of that, suddenly she becomes empowered to bring about change. We weren't looking for that, but God broke in and did those things, you know. It's a new thing that God was doing. It was really quite amazing. And we have to somehow find our way to navigate through life when we've got the highs. And how do we respond to God in the highs? And how do we walk with God humbly when the amazing things are happening, and we don't allow pride to get in there? How do we keep ourselves humble before God and give all the glory to God? And again, not allow pride to come in, because that's what the devil would love us to do more than anything. Well done, didn't you do well there? And all that kind of stuff. Because the moment we get pride in there, God opposes us and we've lost the plot. And also in the lows, how do we navigate life when we're in the lows? I was telling John half an hour ago about, I was talking with an Anglican vicar from Southsea who I mentor the other day. He came up and we sat in the shack, in the shed, and having a chat for an hour or so. And he was telling me how he'd heard this talk that really impressed him. I don't know who it was. And the guy was talking about when you've been in the highs and you end up in the valley and walking through the valley, don't stay in the valley long, climb back up the mountain. And I felt within my spirit, oh no. When you're in the valley, you need to be in the valley. And you don't force people to climb up the mountain again. You help them to look at the mountain from where our help comes. You look there, but it's only the Holy Spirit and God who's going to lift us up there with support of people. To say, come on, get out of that, is wrong, because there's a process that takes place when we're in the valley, isn't there? David discovered that, didn't he? That's why he wrote his wonderful psalm, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of the death, I'll fear no evils. And he found that, the table laid before him when his faithful friends and retainers came out of Jerusalem and brought food to them, and he was reflecting on God's goodness in that. And sometimes we've got to be prepared to go through those experiences, but how do we find God in that? And how do we respond to one another when our friends are going through that sort of thing? And I had a valley experience. It finished it just the day before. I had this wonderful hilltop experience with that young lady. And it was something I totally didn't expect. And I don't want to go into all the detail, but it's a little bit long-winded. But I've got a friend down in Storrington who has got no relatives, and I was able to lead this guy to the Lord, and Kay and I have made a point of seeing him every month and taking him out for a meal. He's got no relatives or anything like that, and he's a bit older than I am. And he's got some ill health problems that actually can't be fixed. There's no fix for them. They can only get worse outside of a miracle. There's no fix. And over the last few months, part of it is mobility. And over the last few months, he's had really low times. One when he fell over and he was lying on the floor for about 4 hours before anybody found him, and he couldn't get up. And he was taken in and out of hospital, and with rest and recuperation, a bit of help from OT, he's able to get mobile, but still shuffling and stuff. So not too good at all. And I went down to see him and to meet with his solicitor, because I was going to be made power of attorney for health matters. That's what he wanted. And when I got there, he was just sat on his chair downstairs, couldn't stand up, incontinent, stoma bag which had burst, and all that kind of stuff, and in a terrible state. And I phoned for the ambulance, and the ambulance crew came out and spent 3.5 hours there and said, it's no good us taking him to hospital, because they'll just send him home. There's nothing they can fix. And they'll send him back home again. And so the ambulance guys, bless them, spent 3.5 hours on their computer, on their phone, trying to get some social care for him. Couldn't get any, because he's got over £23,000 in the bank. Social services phoned me up, asked me that. I said, yes, he has. Sorry, we can't help you. The doctor's surgery said there's nothing more we can do for Mr. Hopley, because, he can't be fixed, and blah, 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 blah. And suddenly the ambulance crew said, we won't take him to hospital. It'll be a total waste of time. Is there anything else we can do for you? He said, well, at least carry him up the stairs and get him into bed, because he can't stand up. And so I spent the next 5 days driving down to Storrington every morning, wake him up, a bit of breakfast in bed, wet through, try to force him up, lean him against the wardrobe, literally, as I'm changing him and changing the bedclothes and putting back in, new sheets, and take the stuff down and wash it and dry it and do his meals, and cancelling all my work. And this was going on, and then I had a glimmer of hope. I found a company who said they, in that area, would do home care visits. And I arranged for this manager to meet me on Tuesday with him at his house and to get this home care set up. Because though I'd been going down there for the last 4 or 5 days, Tuesday was the last day I could go. I needed 2 days when I couldn't go. And he was going to be told, I was leaving him overnight as it was, which wasn't a good thing. But, and so Tuesday I set my mind on this. Please, Lord, let this be it, And I want him taken and get some care package this afternoon. And at 11:45, the manager phoned me up and said, can we postpone for 2 weeks? I said, no, he's got to go in care today. She said, oh, didn't the company tell you we can't take anybody until after Christmas? And suddenly, I'm really in the valley then. I'm thinking, what can I do? Because I can't be with him for 2 days. The things couldn't be changed that I'd got to do. And so I phoned the doctor's surgery, and they give me the same old spiel, there's nothing we can do. And eventually, I found one bed in a care home in that locality, in a nursing home, and I phoned them up, and it actually came from a receptionist from the doctor's surgery. So I phoned them up and said, can I have that bed? I didn't ask how much it was. I didn't ask what the procedure was. Can I have that bed? Yes, would you like to come up and have a look around? No, I can't come up and look around. We need to do assessment before we can say whether he can come. Come and do the assessment now. Come now. But I can't. Yes, you must do. He's got to go in today. So I'm speaking like that sort of thing to them and thinking, is this it, Lord? Is this the glimmer of hope, to get through? I phoned the doctor's surgery and say, we've got this underway. I said, but do you want to come and look at him because he's got horrendous bed sores and he's bleeding and stuff? And so the doctor then came out and had a look, and these people came from the care home to have a look, and the doctor said, he cannot stay on his own. I said, so what are you going to do for him? Nothing we can do, but he can't stay on his own. So, a bit more pressure. And the care home said, okay, we'll take him, but you'll have to get him there in your car. We can't get him there. I said, but he can't walk. How do we get him down the stairs? I said, the only thing I can think of is if you will help me carry him to the top of the stairs, I'll take him down on his bottom one step at a time. They were horrified. I thought, you haven't seen what I've been doing to change him and get it, you would have been really horrified. He said, we can't do that. Phone the doctors and tell them to get an ambulance to bring him to us. Our time is running on now, and they said admin closes at 6:30, so it's got to be before then. And the doctors say, we tried to phone an ambulance, we can't get one. The only way they'll come is on 999, and all they'll do then is take him to Worthing Hospital. They will not take him to the care home. We've spoken to the supervisor. They say, that's the rules, that's it. Will you have a private ambulance? Yes, we'll pay for that. Don't know where I'm going to get the money from. Yes, we'll pay for that, because I've got faith for money, but I'm struggling on everything else. Anyway, to cut a long story short, they can't even get that. There's no private ambulances available. And the care home's phoning me, say, when are you coming up? And I'm phoning the surgery and saying anything with the ambulances. No, I said, I'll just throw one other thing in the mix. At 6:30, I've got to leave, because I take heart medication. I haven't brought it out with me for the evening because I was expecting to be in a care home. I'll have to leave. It'll take me an hour to get home, and he's going to be on his own. What can you do? They said, give us one more chance of phoning around. And eventually, they phoned me back at 6:20 and said, our doctor has spoken to the head of A&E at Worthing Hospital, the duty consultant, and he has agreed that if you do a 999, get the man down there, he'll give him a cursory look over and send him straight back in an ambulance to drop him off at the care home. And, I was thinking, honestly, at that time, I was sat down, with the house is covered in wet sheets that I've been washing every day because you haven't got a tumble dryer and hanging them over doors and stuff. And I'm sat there, drained, no more vision left to what to do, and thinking, oh God, oh God, oh God. Nothing more than that. And it was only after that was sorted, as I'm driving home, I thought, how miraculous, God, that you could get, the doctor from this consultancy who didn't want to come and see him, speak to A&E, who only would have sent him back and said, there's nothing we can do for him, and you worked a miracle, and he's in this care home when there was no other beds in any other care home. And I thought, finding God in those really difficult times. And it wasn't like when I entered the process with this restorative process, I'd got faith for that process to work. I've done it so many times before. I know that it works, and I've prayed about it, and I know where it's going. I've got an idea. I was surprised at the ultimate outcome, but I knew where we were going with that sort of thing. I knew I wouldn't make things worse, let's put it that way. But with this, I've got nothing left, God. Nothing at all. And it's really in that dark place. And I remember sitting down there and just thinking about that. And it was only as I'm driving home I could say, oh God, from that dark place, you did something again that I didn't think would be possible. You've done something totally impossible. And that made me think about, generally when we go through these dark places and we have these traumas, thinking about Jesus. And we're thinking about the incarnation of Jesus, but I'm thinking about the death of Jesus. And just reading in Matthew 26, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him and began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And going a little further, he fell on his face on the ground and prayed, Father, if it's possible, please take this from me. And he did that 3 times, and he went back to the disciples and prayed again, yet not my will, but your will to be done. And then they came and took him away and crucified him. And then we see at the cross, it's gone even worse. Because on there he feels totally abandoned by God, doesn't he? In that situation, for the first time in his humanity, as the last Adam, he feels abandoned from God. And he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yet into your hands I still entrust my spirit. And I thought, on a much larger scale than what I experienced, and a much larger scale than what we've experienced even, when everything was going totally pear-shaped as far as Jesus is concerned, absolutely horrific. He was in such sorrow, having such a breakdown that blood was actually breaking through the pores of his skin on his forehead that Luke records in his gospel message, as a doctor records that. And then, yet still, when I've got nothing left, I still trust in you, God. And God did that amazing work on the cross. And it made me think about, for us, when we're going through those sort of things, when all we can do is say, Lord, I don't know where this is going. I just trust myself to you, God. Trust myself to you in this sort of thing. And what Jesus needed at that time with his disciples was not dialogue. He didn't want them to start talking about why are you going through this and what the options are. All he wanted is empathetic companions. And when we're often going through grief, as people who observe others going through grief or trauma or whatever it may be, we sometimes think, I haven't got the words to say, I don't know quite what to do. They don't want that. They just want somebody to stand with them in empathy and be there for them. And that's all Jesus wanted from his disciples. And often so we want. And often, with empathy, we get it mixed up with sympathy. And my definition of the difference between empathy and sympathy is sympathy, I try to project on the person what I think I would feel in that situation. And empathy is, I want to feel what they feel in that situation. And I've got a little video I just want to show you. Please, Lord, may this work, about empathy. It's just a very simple one. Oh, sound, Rob, yeah, sorry. Another click should do it. And maybe another click should do it.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversation is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
And I just find that so much in life. And, you know, I know some people can't empathise for all sorts of reasons. And they sympathise. And it just makes me cringe when they're sympathising, because it's just projection and it doesn't make things better. And all we need to do is to be empathetic with people and say, you know, I'll come sit in that valley with you for as long as it takes. And I'll be with you in that journey for as long as it takes. And also, when we're in that valley, could you put the next slide up, John, please? Sometimes, when we're going through life, this is called the victim recovery model, but actually, it's trauma of any sort, same thing. When you, on the left, if you're just going through life, things seem quite level, and suddenly something disastrously goes wrong, and it feels like we're falling in the valley or that hole. There's a process that takes place. Okay, thanks, John. The first is that initial reaction to it. to what's happening. And when you're going through that, it could be all sorts of things. It could be shock, it could be fear, it could be doubt, it could be skepticism, it could be denial, it could be, where's God in this? It could be a blame thing. We go through these shock processes as we go through it, and then as we go further through the process, we go through a process called disorganisation. Trish is nodding her head. She's been going through this. And everything's disorganised, and everything seems too much as well, and you just don't know what to do with things. And it's a bit chaotic. But then as we start to come out of it, we start to get reconstruction. And the thing is, when you start to come out of that, sometimes when you're on the upward slope, you're at the same level as you are on the downward slope sometimes, and it feels the same. But it's not the same. I often find people that I've been involved with over a long period of time who've been dealing with real issues. They might say to me, it's really horrible today, those memories came back, I'm feeling this, and I felt, really scared to do anything or whatever it may be, and they're talking about it, and I listen to them, and then I say to them, but remember 10 years ago when you were feeling those same feelings, and they are the same feelings, you were so frozen you couldn't get up from behind your desk. Or remember when you phoned up and you couldn't get out of your car and go into that meeting, you're not there, you're feeling those things, but actually we're on the way up, we're moving in a different direction. And sometimes just being aware of that you can be on the upward slope on your way up, but it just feels like it was on the downward slope. That's okay, the feelings are the same, but you're not in the same position. And then as we go a bit higher, when we start to make adjustments, we learn to adjust. And I often say to people when they've been through some seriously bad stuff and they feel totally disabled and not able to do anything, you will be able to walk again, but you might walk with a limp. You might have to adjust and walk with a limp. It's never going to be exactly the same. And actually, when I drew that little graph, that where you're coming up onto the level again, actually, that's a lazy graph, really. It should be just a gentle incline, because you might never get back to exactly the same place. Or it might be that the experiences you've been to, when you've processed them and in time, by the grace of God, take you beyond that, and they turn around for the good. But it's just recognizing that we go through those processes, and those are normal. And what we do need is, yes, when we're at the disorganisation stage, we might need people to help us there and help us. But it seems when you're on the downward slope, when you're near the bottom there, little things start to seem like major things and fall in on top of you. And I was thinking of it's a funny story really, I'm talking a serious subject, but a funny illustration of the man who lived in the little village who had a donkey, and one night he woke up and he heard the donkey braying and making a lot of noise, and he didn't bother get out of bed. But the next morning when he got up and looked for his donkey, and he found the donkey had fallen in the well. And he saw the donkey down in this well, his old donkey, and he's thinking, there's no way I can get him up from there. I can't pull him up. So I know what I'll do. I'll just fill the well in on top of him. And so bit by bit he started getting a shovel of dirt and throwing it in on the well. And I thought, sometimes when you're in the bottom of the valley, it's like being in that hole, and little stuff, like even just a shovelful of dirt, which you normally vacuum up, whatever it may be, just falls on top of you, and it feels like the weight of the world's coming in, and you don't know how to deal with it. And this donkey, when he was in that well, didn't have any method to deal with it other than just to shake it off and let it settle. He couldn't shovel it up and throw it out, and then stand on it. And when some more came, there's no way he could have thrown it out. He just shook it off and stood on it. And as he did that, he got higher and higher and higher. And sometimes those things that come in on us, when we're really there, they seem like the weight of the world. Don't worry about them in the disorganized stage. Don't try to process them. Just shake them off stamp them down, and eventually there'll be a platform that help you to move up. Don't let it get on top of you. Keep shaking it off. And this is an unusual talk to bring in December when we're thinking of Christmas, and not one I would normally think of doing, but I was saying to John, I think it was, that on Thursday, I think it might have been, I sat down at my computer. I just got a time to pray, oh God, give me something for Sunday, and because I've been really hectic and I hadn't had a chance, any thinking space, and I just felt God wanted me to talk about this. And at the same time, I opened up my emails and saw the newsletter and heard about Terry, and I thought, yeah, this is the right time to bring this message for us. So, in and all that, wherever you are, we can find God. And if we're in the valley, then okay, walk through the valley with God. Don't let anybody convince you that you've got to climb up that mountain again like that vicar thought you've got to do. You haven't. Just walk with God and with those friends with you, and slowly the Spirit will raise us up and we'll come out the other side and be at the top. So I do think it would be a good time to have a time of ministry, John, and maybe we'll have a chance to pray with those who are walking through the valley at the moment. Yeah, thank you.
Steve, do you want to get...
Trish. But there's other valleys that we have. There are valleys that might be to do with finance, it might be to do with relational breakdown that's not getting sorted, it might be with all the pressure that Christmas is bringing that we can't deal with, and we don't know how we're going to actually make ends meet, or it might be other things in our own lives that we're having to deal with. And if that's you, I really feel that we ought to be able to stand together empathetically with people who can put an arm around us and just be there and pray, just as Jesus wanted his disciples to do. Don't need much conversation, I just want you to pray and be with me as I go through this.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good, yeah. Thank you, John.